The management planning process. Chapter 2 is where we begin our discussion today. When we look at the management planning process, one of the questions that we can pose is this question centered around what is the difference between leadership and management? Leadership is about setting a new direction or vision for a group that someone is being followed by. Management is the controls or direction that people and resources in a group uh, get according to principles or values that have already been established. So it could be said that leadership is a little more visionary in perspective, and management is a little more executionable or implementable in perspective. But I think for our purposes, we're going to kind of use them one and the same because in the 21st century workplace, when you were looking at all the different variables that come into play, we need both leadership and management, and we need them to work in concert with one another, especially when we look at the planning process. So the planning process really can speak to the different, to start the discussion, can speak to the different types of leadership necessary. So we're going to go at a higher level to talk about the visionary piece of this first, and then work our way down into the management tactical level or a level of the discussion. So currently, when we look at leadership, there's three theories that could be, or four theories that we could take advantage of, I think, that are applicable in the 21st century workplace. Situational leadership, really looking at a person who takes into considerations relationships, resources, demands to try to pull things together as best as possible based upon the situation they're faced with. Participative leadership, which really works on uh, having an experience, an interesting experience that people tend to pull from, and then they pick choices on how they're going to operate, to participate a little bit or to participate a lot. Contingency leadership. So this one can be difficult for some in the workplace because it gives the appearance that there's no right particular way to do things because you are always having a backup or a secondary plan that you might fall back on. And then transformational leadership. This can be an uplifting, engaging type of experience because there's passion and energy into making sure every T is dotted, every I is crossed. Now, there are various other types of leadership out there. In fact, you can do some quick research and you'll find different ones. I think these can kind of summarize what we want to look at in the 21st century in order to then work our way into how we manage effectively. So this kind of gives us a current state in the current workplace and marketplace. Now, let's drill down to the management planning piece of this and start to look at how do we plan or put together the planning process. First, we look to scan or get surveys and information collected. Then that allows us to build our goals, of which we will then build strategies. And then finally, which is kind of an odd outlayer here, we pull in the internet into this discussion. So when we look at scans, we're looking to get information that helps us manage the business and incorporate not only the leadership styles you saw earlier, but also all of this information from a social, technological, economic, competitive, and legal perspective. When we look at goals, one of the questions we want to start and asking ourselves is, why are they difficult to manage? Why are they difficult to formulate? And what goals do we even put in place in order to help us manage our plan in the management planning process? So that then becomes the impetus for our focus and our work, because the goals have to have clarity, they have to be sustainable, and they have to be achievable. And I think this is extremely important because a lot of times when we think about managing goals, we get to a point where we make them almost clinical in how you either obtained the goal or you didn't. And that can be a setup for failure, not only in the planning process, but for our business ultimately if we manage in that fashion. Strategy is about position and communication and delivery. So we ask ourselves two primary questions. What is it about managing strategy that's so important? And then how do we understand the relationship between managing strategy and leading strategy? And remember, the leading aspect of it is the visionary aspect. The management aspect of it is more the execution aspect. So if our strategy can fall under this position, communication, and delivery, we have a greater likelihood to make the strategy successful and then can move on to building the programs, the management programs that we'll see in the management plan in the next chapter. And then the internet. From a competitive standpoint, we have to ask ourselves, if we have this 21st century business, is it more e-commerce or e-business? And how do we manage that unique business? Because e-commerce and e-business are about facilitation and integration. It's looking at both those components. And let's take that particular view a little bit further. E-commerce really looks at building the front end of the business, business to consumer, business to business, consumer to consumer, and even mobile. And it's more strategic in nature and it's business activity oriented. Whereas e-business focuses in on the back end of the business, making sure that there are secure relationships, there's safety, there are tactics put in place to make sure everyone can do what they need to do to conduct business on the front end. How you take this slide is really to take a look at it and say, between e-commerce and e-business, how do I manage the cross-pollination on a regular and consistent basis? So here's some definitions that you can take into consideration. When we look at a scan, how we process to get information around the organization to help us with potential trends. When we look at goals, we're really looking at objectives with respect to time and magnitude. When we look at strategy, this is our game plan on how to reach our goals. And then when we look at the internet, a tool that we use to help us not only network, but to build our business. So what did we learn? We learned about those four elements, but the question becomes, do we understand from a management standpoint in the planning process how these four elements can help us be more effective if we can capitalize on how to manage them more effectively? That makes sense to you. Here is your thought for the day. People never improve unless they look to some standard or example higher or better than themselves.